Your plant is talking to you right now. Not with words, obviously, but through its leaves, its stems, its growth, and even the way it sits in its pot. The problem is, most of us were never taught how to listen. We wait until a plant is completely brown, collapsed, or dropping leaves before we realize something is wrong. But plants usually don't go from healthy to dying overnight. They warn you first. A leaf loses its shine. New growth becomes smaller. The plant suddenly stops growing. A few lower leaves start turning yellow. These can be quiet messages that something is changing beneath the surface. Someone once told me they were shocked when their pothos suddenly died over a single weekend. But when we looked closer, it hadn't died suddenly at all. For nearly a month, the plant had been sending signals. Its leaves had gradually lost their glossy appearance. New growth had slowed almost to a stop. A few lower leaves had yellowed and disappeared. The warning signs were there. They just weren't being recognized. And that's exactly what we're going to change today. By the end of this video, you'll know how to read some of the most common signals your houseplants give you before a small problem turns into a plant emergency.
Chapter 1. The 4 signals every plant sends. Before we go leaf by leaf, it helps to understand that plants communicate through 4 main channels: leaf color, leaf texture, growth pattern, and the soil itself. Almost every problem you'll ever diagnose comes back to reading these 4 signals together, not in isolation. A single yellow leaf might mean nothing. A single yellow leaf combined with soggy soil and slowed growth tells a much clearer story. Think of these 4 signals like a doctor checking multiple vitals instead of just one.
Relying on a single clue in isolation leads to false alarms and missed problems. Reading them together is what turns guessing into genuine diagnosis. A skill we'll build on heavily throughout this entire channel, especially once we reach the dedicated troubleshooting pillar later in the series.
Chapter 2. Leaf color. The most obvious, most misread signal. Color changes are usually the first thing people notice, but they're also the most commonly misinterpreted. A single lower, older leaf turning yellow and dropping is often completely normal. Plants naturally shed their oldest leaves as they redirect energy toward new growth. This isn't a crisis, it's routine plant maintenance. What's different is multiple leaves yellowing at once, especially newer ones, or yellowing that spreads quickly across the plant within days. That pattern usually points to something more significant, most commonly overwatering, sometimes a light mismatch, occasionally a nutrient issue we'll cover in depth in the fertilizing pillar later on. Pale, washed-out green across an entire plant, rather than true yellow, often signals a light issue. The plant isn't producing enough chlorophyll because it isn't getting enough light to justify it. Dark, almost blackish patches, especially soft ones, are a more urgent signal, frequently tied to rot or cold damage. Learning to distinguish one old leaf, normal aging, from multiple leaves, rapid yellowing, is one of the single highest value skills in this entire hobby.
Chapter 3. Leaf texture. What your fingers know before your eyes do. Texture is an underused diagnostic tool, mostly because it requires actually touching your plant instead of just glancing at it. A firm, slightly springy leaf is a strong sign of a well-hydrated, healthy plant. A leaf that feels soft, almost deflated, or noticeably thinner than usual is often dehydrated, even if the color still looks fine on the surface. Crispy, dry, brittle texture, especially concentrated at the edges or tips, usually points to low humidity or inconsistent watering rather than a light problem. Mushy, almost slimy texture is a different story entirely. This is a strong indicator of rot, whether from overwatering or, less commonly, a fungal or bacterial issue, and it typically needs prompt attention rather than a wait-and-see approach. The reason texture matters so much is that it often reveals problems before color does. A plant can look perfectly green while already feeling soft and thin to the touch, meaning texture checks give you an earlier warning window than color alone ever could.
Chapter 4. Growth Pattern, the slow motion signal. Growth pattern is the hardest signal to read because it unfolds over weeks, not days, which makes it easy to overlook entirely. A healthy plant, during its active growing season, should be producing new leaves at a reasonably steady pace, with those new leaves generally matching or slightly exceeding the size and color of existing ones. Stunted growth, where a plant seems to just sit there for months without producing anything new, is rarely random. It's almost always tied back to one of the 5 core needs we discussed in the last lesson: insufficient light, inconsistent watering, depleted or compacted soil, or the plant simply still adjusting after a recent move or repot.
Leggy, stretched growth, where new leaves are unusually small and spaced far apart on an elongated stem, is a near certain sign the plant is reaching desperately toward more light than it's currently receiving. Interestingly, growth pattern is also one of the best ways to distinguish a genuinely struggling plant from one that's simply dormant for the season. Many plants naturally slow or pause growth during shorter winter days. This isn't decline, it's a normal seasonal rhythm, and forcing extra water or fertilizer onto a dormant plant to help it often backfires.
Chapter 5. Reading the soil itself. The final signal is easy to overlook because it doesn't involve the plant at all. It's the soil surrounding the roots. Soil that stays wet and heavy for many days after watering, especially if it develops a slightly sour smell, suggests drainage issues or overwatering that hasn't yet shown up in the leaves. Soil that pulls away from the edges of the pot, becomes pale and dusty, and dries out within a day or 2 of watering, suggests the opposite problem, or simply a pot that's become too small for the plant's root system. Fine white, fuzzy growth on the soil's surface is usually a harmless surface mold linked to excess moisture and poor airflow, not a sign your plant is dying, though it's still worth addressing by adjusting watering and improving airflow, both of which we discussed in the last 2 lessons. Tiny flying insects hovering near the soil are typically fungus gnats, another moisture-related signal we'll cover in full detail in the dedicated pest control pillar later in this series. Checking the soil takes only a few seconds, but often reveals problems days before they show up anywhere on the plant itself, which is exactly why it deserves a spot in your regular routine, not just an afterthought during watering.
Reading a plant isn't a mystical talent some people have and others don't. It's simply a matter of knowing what to look and feel for and checking it consistently. Color tells you the broad story. Texture often reveals problems earlier than color does. Growth pattern shows you the slow motion trend over weeks. And the soil itself frequently gives away issues before the plant ever visibly reacts. Read these 4 signals together, regularly, and you'll catch nearly every problem while it's still small and easy to fix. Everything covered today, including a printable quick reference chart for these 4 signals, is included inside the free companion guide, The Confident Plant Parent, tying directly into Chapter 4. If you've been building this guide alongside the series, grab it using the link in the description below. In the next lesson, we're going all the way back to basics on watering, but this time going far deeper than check the soil, with the single beginner watering rule that changes almost everything once you truly understand it. If today's video helped you see your own plants differently, subscribe so you're here for it, because this series keeps building, lesson after lesson, into a complete system.